Have you ever wondered why a man's eyes suddenly harden, his voice sharpens, or his entire presence recoils the moment you speak a certain truth? It is not random. It is not simply irritation. It is the echo of a wound buried so deep within him that even he pretends it does not exist. And yet, when you touch it, the mask slips. For a brief instant, you see not the strong, composed exterior, but the fragile boy beneath, the one who learned long ago that showing weakness could cost him love, approval, or dignity. Carl Jung taught us that what a man hides most fiercely is what defines him most profoundly. The shadow he conceals is not just anger, not just pride, it is pain. He protects it with bravado, silence, or even cruelty. But when a woman's words, gestures, or simple presence graze that hidden scar, something ancient stirs inside him. He may lash out, he may withdraw, or he may attempt to turn the wound back on her through blame or mockery, but all of it points to one truth. You have touched the wound he tries to hide. And this is the paradox. You may believe that such a reaction means you did something wrong, that your sensitivity, your strength, your honesty pushed him away. But in reality, you only illuminated the part of him that still trembles in the dark. Jung would call it the anima's confrontation with the masculine shadow. Seneca might describe it as the soul recoiling from its own unfinished battles. You see, every man carries unfinished wars within him. Wars inherited from fathers who demanded hardness, mothers who unconsciously leaned too much on their sons, societies that equated vulnerability with failure. Most women misinterpret this moment. They think, "He is rejecting me." No, he is rejecting the mirror you held up to him. Your very presence revealed the fracture he hoped would remain unseen. When you sense his hostility or cold withdrawal, it is not your inadequacy being exposed, it is his unresolved shame. Imagine the wound of a boy told, never to cry, never to need, never to show fear. That boy grows into a man who wears armor so convincingly that even he forgets what lies beneath. Until, of course, a woman looks at him with eyes that see too much. But you must understand, when you touch his wound, you awaken a storm. It is not the storm of hatred, it is the storm of survival. He is terrified that if you see the brokenness, you will no longer desire him, no longer respect him. His anger, his sarcasm, even his silence are defenses, not truths. The truth is much quieter, much more fragile. He fears being unworthy of love, and here is where the power shifts. For if you can recognize the difference between his wound and his essence, you will no longer mistake his reactions for your fault. You will not shrink when he withdraws, nor will you bend when he projects his pain onto you. Instead, you will see the archetype playing out before your eyes, the wounded warrior, the hidden child, the man who cannot yet reconcile, his shadow. And in that moment, the question is no longer, "What is wrong with me?" but rather, "Do I choose to engage with a man still at war with himself?" Stoic wisdom teaches us that what belongs to another's inner life is not yours to control. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." His wound is his inner event. You are not its cause, nor are you its cure, but touching it will reveal whether he is willing to grow or whether he will continue hiding behind masks. Some men, when confronted with the mirror of truth, step into the fire of transformation. They choose to face the shadow, to embrace the part of themselves long denied. Others retreat deeper into denial, blaming the woman who dared to see. And so you stand at a threshold. Your presence has unearthed what he buried. Your intuition has grazed the place he swore no one would ever touch. What happens next is not about him alone. It is about you. Will you allow his wound to dictate your worth? Or will you stand in the knowing that your perception is not a curse, but a gift? The gift of sight, the gift of depth, the gift of feminine intuition piercing through masculine armor. There is a silence that follows when you touch the hidden wound of a man. It is a silence charged with tension, a silence that feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. He may not speak it, but his entire body carries the weight of defense. The rigid jaw, the sudden avoidance of your eyes, the way his words become clipped or overly rational. Jung would say the shadow has been exposed to light, and like a creature of the night it recoils, desperate to retreat. But beneath this retreat lies something far more telling. It is not indifference, it is fear. The man whose wound you have touched is not unmoved, he is unsettled, destabilized, stripped of his carefully crafted persona. Every man carries an archetype he longs to embody: the protector, the provider, the one in control. Yet, when his wound is exposed, these archetypes falter. He is no longer the warrior, but the child, no longer the king, but the orphan. And this inversion terrifies him more than he will ever admit. You may notice how quickly he shifts into defense. He might question your intentions, accuse you of being too critical, or distance himself under the pretense of needing space. But the truth is simpler and darker. You pierced through his illusion, and illusions hate to be undone. This is why so many men prefer the comfort of superficial relationships. It is safer to be admired for strength than to be truly seen in weakness. It is safer to charm than to be vulnerable, safer to dominate than to admit fragility. The Stoics remind us that man's greatest suffering comes not from the world itself, but from his judgment of it. Epictetus said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the view which they take of them." His wound is not the moment you spoke, nor the truth you revealed. It is the meaning he attaches to it. He believes that being seen in his brokenness makes him less desirable, less powerful, less worthy. That belief shapes his reaction. And so, when you stand before him with truth, he is not fighting you. He is fighting the ghosts of every voice that ever told him he was not enough. But here lies the paradox of attraction. Women often misread these storms as proof of rejection. They shrink back, soften their words, dim their power in hopes of preserving connection. Yet the woman who understands shadow work knows this moment differently. She knows that when he bristles, she has touched something raw, something unhealed, and rather than bending into fear, she stands rooted. She does not need to push further, nor does she retreat. She simply allows the silence to reveal its truth. His pain is his, and she is not responsible for carrying it. Carl Jung often spoke of projection, the unconscious tendency to cast onto others what we refuse to face within ourselves. When a man blames you, mocks you, or belittles you after his wound has been touched, it is rarely about you. It is about the part of himself he cannot yet own. He projects his shame onto you so he can continue believing it does not belong to him. If he calls you too sensitive, it is because his own sensitivity terrifies him. If he calls you too demanding, it is because he fears he cannot meet your needs without exposing his inadequacy. If he goes cold, it is because warmth feels dangerous to a man who was once punished for needing love. And so the woman who dares to stand in her truth becomes both a mirror and a catalyst. She reflects to him the reality of his shadow, and in doing so, she offers him a choice: remain in denial or step into growth. Few men will consciously thank a woman for this. Some will resent her, others will run. But those who are ready will return, not with excuses but with humility. They will confess that her presence unsettled them because it awakened a part of themselves long forgotten. Yet, whether he chooses denial or transformation is not yours to control. And here is where your true power emerges. When you see his wound exposed, you must decide. Will you lose yourself trying to heal him? Or will you guard your own soul, remembering that every warrior must face his own battle? Jungian individuation is not a path you can walk for him. It is a path he must choose for himself. The Stoics would remind you that freedom comes not from controlling another, but from mastering your own responses. And so, when he turns cold or angry, your task is not to prove your worth, but to remember it. The wound you touch in him is not an invitation to lose yourself. It is a revelation, a test, a glimpse of the truth behind the mask. And once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. What happens next is the true measure of his character, for a man cannot remain neutral once his hidden wound has been seen. He will either armor himself more tightly, building walls of sarcasm, silence, or distance, or he will, however reluctantly, begin to face the truth of what has been revealed. This choice defines not only the path of the relationship, but the trajectory of his own individuation. Jung described this as the confrontation with the shadow, the moment when what has been denied demands recognition. Most flee from it. Only a few dare to stay. You will recognize the man who flees by his patterns. He becomes the master of avoidance. Suddenly busy, suddenly cold, suddenly detached. He convinces himself that you are the problem, because blaming you is easier than staring into the abyss of his own shame. He hides behind the rational mask, telling himself stories of incompatibility, of timing, of your supposed flaws. But beneath those narratives lies one trembling truth. You reminded him of his unfinished pain, and he could not bear it. And yet, the man who stays is different. He may still resist, still bristle, still struggle to hold eye contact when you touch the rawness in him. But he does not disappear. His silence is not avoidance, it is wrestling. His anger is not dismissal, it is fear clawing at the edges of his identity. For him, your presence is not a threat, but a mirror. And though the mirror terrifies him, some part of him knows he cannot grow without it. Jung once wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When you touch his wound, you have pulled the darkness into view. What he does with it is the making or unmaking of his manhood. But here is where the danger lies for you. The feminine heart often longs to soothe, to heal, to mend what is broken in him. And yet, if you mistake his wound for your responsibility, you will lose yourself. The energy of rescue is not love, it is entrapment. A woman who anchors her worth in healing a man's hidden pain binds herself to his shadow. She becomes not his partner, but his caretaker, his scapegoat, his silent witness, to a war he refuses to fight. This is why so many women find themselves exhausted, drained, diminished in relationships with wounded men who refuse growth. They confuse proximity to his wound with intimacy, when in truth it is dependency. They accept his projections, his withdrawals, his defenses, believing that if they just love harder, wait longer, soften more, he will change. But this is the lie the shadow tells, that your sacrifice can complete the work he will not do for himself. The woman, who stands in her power, knows better. She sees his wound, but she does not carry it. She feels the sting of his projection, but she does not absorb it. She hears his silence, but she does not interpret it as a verdict on her worth. Instead, she stands firm, grounded in the truth that her role is not to rescue, but to reveal. She does not chase him into the shadows. She holds her light steady, knowing he must choose to step into it or turn away. Here, the wisdom of the Stoics merges with Jungian depth. Marcus Aurelius taught that the obstacle is the way, that within every wound lies the path to strength. If he faces his wound, if he dares to own it, it becomes not his prison but his portal. He grows not smaller, but greater. And yet, if he resists, if he clings to his mask, he becomes a prisoner of himself. In either case, you have already done your part. By being unapologetically whole, by refusing to dim your perception, you have forced the truth into the open. Do you see the paradox? The very thing he resents in you, Your ability to see beneath the surface is the very thing that could free him. But freedom cannot be imposed, it must be chosen. And so your task is not to wait for his choice, but to remember yours. You can love him without losing yourself. You can recognize his wound without becoming entangled in it. You can stand as a mirror without becoming his mask. The moment you touched his wound, everything changed. He cannot unsee what you revealed, and you cannot unknow what you now understand. The mask has cracked, and in the fragments lies the truth of who he really is. Not the man he projects, but the man he fears you will see. There comes a point where the dance around his wound reveals not only him, but also you. For every time you see him retreat into silence, every time his words turn sharp to deflect your truth, every time his body grows tense when your intuition brushes against his shadow, you are being asked a question. Will you collapse into his wound? Or will you rise above it? Jung knew this moment well. It is the initiation of the feminine into her own power. To touch a man's hidden wound is not merely to confront his darkness, it is to confront your own boundaries, your own resilience, your own hunger for connection. Because beneath the surface, this is not only his struggle. His reaction awakens an old wound in you as well. That fear of rejection, that whisper of, "I am too much," that ache of abandonment when he withdraws. His wound echoes against your own, creating a storm of projections, defenses, and silent wars. If you are not conscious, you begin to lose the distinction between his pain and your worth. You begin to think that his silence is evidence of your failure, that his hostility is proof of your unlovability. And this is how the shadow consumes two souls at once, his through denial and yours through self-doubt. But what if you refuse to accept that lie? What if instead you saw his recoil for what it truly is? The wound speaking, not the essence of the man. Imagine the strength that would flow through you if you could stand in the fire of his reaction without shrinking. That is the posture of the empowered feminine. Not aggression, not rescue, not submission, but presence. The presence that says, "I see you, even in your hiding. I see the wound, but I will not wear it as my own." It is here that the ancient wisdom of the Stoics serves you. Seneca once wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." His recoil frightens you because you imagine it means the end of love, the death of intimacy. But in reality, it is simply a man trembling before his own reflection. You are not the cause of his fracture. You are the mirror. And no mirror is responsible for the image it reflects. This is the subtle but profound shift. To stop personalizing his wound. To stop making his shadows your indictment. To stop confusing his defense mechanisms with your truth. Once you make that shift, you regain your power. You no longer beg for his reassurance when he withdraws, because you know his distance is not about your worth. You no longer plead with him to explain his anger, because you know anger is the armor of shame. You no longer silence yourself in fear of triggering him, because you know truth is not cruelty. It is clarity. And yet this clarity is not coldness. To see his wound without absorbing it is not indifference. It is wisdom. It is the knowing that compassion does not mean entanglement, that empathy does not mean erasure of your boundaries, that love does not mean losing yourself to the labyrinth of another's pain. Jung would say that this is the moment of individuation for the feminine, to hold your center even as the storm rages, to remain whole even when another is fractured. Do you realize how rare this is? Most women, when faced with a man's shadow, either retreat into self-doubt or lose themselves in the role of healer. But the one who can stand still, neither shrinking nor rescuing, becomes magnetic. Not because she caters to his ego, but because she awakens in him a possibility he has never known. The possibility of being fully seen and still held, not as a boy to be fixed, but as a man who must choose. This is why your presence is both terrifying and irresistible to him. You force him to face himself, and at the same time, you embody the mystery of a woman who does not collapse. It is the paradox he cannot resolve. With logic, how can she touch my wound, see my shadow, and yet still stand in her radiance, unbroken? This paradox calls him to rise, but whether he answers is not in your hands. And so, the question returns to you. Will you continue to see his shadow and yet refuse to betray your light? Will you dare to hold the mirror steady, even if he curses the reflection? Will you choose to embody the truth that your worth does not tremble in the presence of his pain? And then, at last, the final unveiling, the recognition that his wound was never your burden to carry, never your prison to live inside. The wound is his threshold, not your chain. It is the place where he must either confront himself or lose himself. You are not there to drag him through it, nor to absorb the venom of his defenses. You are there as witness, as mirror, as reminder that truth always rises to the surface, whether he embraces it or hides from it. This is the liberation Carl Jung pointed toward. The individuation of the soul, where one no longer collapses into the shadow of another, but stands whole, sovereign, complete. To touch a man's hidden wound and remain grounded in yourself is to reclaim the deepest feminine power, the power to see without rescuing, to feel without drowning, to love without surrendering your essence. It is the power of the anima unchained, the woman who knows that her gaze is not a curse but a catalyst. And here the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius whispers again, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. His anger does not define you. His silence does not diminish you. His rejection, if it comes, is not evidence of your inadequacy, but of his unreadiness. The quality of your thoughts determines whether you interpret his shadow as your failure or as his lesson. When you choose the latter, you transcend the cycle of blame, fear, and longing. Imagine the freedom that comes when you no longer fear his wound, when you can see his withdrawal and not collapse into the story of abandonment, when you can hear his sharp words and not let them poison your self-worth, when you can stand in the presence of his defenses and still know, with crystalline certainty, that you are enough. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. It is the posture of the woman who has made peace with her own shadows, and therefore cannot be undone by his. And so you walk differently. Your energy shifts. You are no longer the woman waiting for him to return with validation, nor the woman pleading for gentleness. You are the woman who recognizes that every soul must wrestle with its own darkness, and you refuse to make his war your battlefield. You choose peace, not because you are indifferent, but because you are sovereign. You choose wholeness, not because you deny love, but because you will not sacrifice yourself to half love. For some men, this will be the very spark that awakens them. They will see that your refusal to collapse is not rejection, but an invitation to rise, to grow, to finally face the wound they buried long ago. For others, your strength will terrify them, and they will flee deeper into the shadows. Both outcomes are liberation, for they reveal truth without disguise. You no longer wonder where you stand. You know, the journey ends not with his transformation, but with yours. For every time you dared to see his wound, you learned to see your own. Every time his shadow tested you, you discovered the light of your boundaries. Every time his defenses rattled you, you practiced returning to your center. In witnessing his hidden pain, you uncovered your hidden strength. And this is the secret Jung and the Stoics alike would remind you of. To love deeply without losing yourself is the highest form of wisdom. To touch the wound without becoming it is the highest form of freedom. To stand in your own worth, regardless of who sees it or who flees from it, is the highest form of empowerment. The man may or may not rise, but you, when you no longer need him to, are already risen. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.